I've got a little extra treat for you today, YouTubers. There's a little puppy sitting down right there. Hey, baby. Hey, puppy. How's it going? On the Arab Peninsula, at the time that Muhammad lived, a lot of people were envious of the fact that the Jews had prophets and the Christians had prophets, but the Arabs didn't have a prophet. And for hundreds of years they were living in that state, and so they were in a condition where they would accept just about anybody. And as a consequence, they accepted just about a nobody. Now, to make my point, I want to show you the evidence, and you can decide for yourself. To begin with, I'd like to talk about a book that someone wrote. Because of the way the book is written, it most likely was written long before 9/11. It seemed to have been written at a time when, with Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and a lot of famous sports personalities were converting to Islam, and that seemed to be a trend. And apparently someone who seemed to know quite a bit about Islam decided to write a book about all the strange things that are in the Quran and in the Hadiths, because this person seemed to be concerned that a lot of people were blindly jumping into Islam without knowing what it was really all about. And so this comic book was made. Now, if you were to look through the comic book, you would sure enough find a lot of chapters with very strange things that are in the Hadiths, stories that are just completely absurd. It definitely makes fun of Muhammad and Islam, but at the same time, it backs up everything by citing the passages in the Hadiths or in the Quran, or both, that support the subject matter. I'm sure you can buy the book at Amazon.com, and there's a PDF version of the book that you can download at a website. And if you thumb through the pages, you'll find that there are a lot of strange stories in there, like people being turned into fish, or Jews being turned into rats and pigs. But one thing that caught my attention one time was a passage kind of mocking, but at the same time accurately portraying what the behavior of Muhammad was when he would have an inspiration. And if you look here, it says, Muhammad never knew when inspiration would come upon him. Inspiration began with ringing in the ears. Then it goes on and says that his heart would race, his face would turn red, and he would fall on the ground. He would sweat profusely while spit drooled out of his mouth. He would snore like a camel or look like he was asleep. His followers would cover him with a sheet until his inspiration passed. Once his inspiration was over, he would recite the Quran. Now, quite some time after I read this, and I read all the other passages in this book, I stumbled upon a video online that describes something called TLE, which stands for temporal lobe epilepsy. And the people that have temporal lobe epilepsy, after they have a seizure, they feel like they're sort of one with God. And so this passage kind of stood out to me because it said once his inspiration was over, he would recite the Quran. But in addition to that, you can find online a video of someone in a hospital who has a TLE seizure, and the person snores like a camel, and he looks like he's asleep towards the end or in the middle of his seizure. And now there's another one where a person's sweating profusely. You can see the pit stains on his shirt while he's having a seizure. And without further ado, I'd like to show you that video now.
Graham Young is blind.
You're moving it up and down. Up.
Yet he can see.
Down.
John Sharon sometimes believes he is God.
My attitude was I was God, and then I had heaven and hell in my eyes. I was the grand guy who created heaven and hell.
David Silvera is convinced his parents are imposters.
It can look like my father. It can look identical to him, exactly like him, but it's not him.
These people are not crazy. They have all suffered damage in tiny sections of their brains that has profoundly distorted the way they perceive themselves and the world around them. In the past, these bizarre cases would have been dismissed by science. But today, one neuroscientist tracks them down with the dogged persistence of a detective.
What excites me is I can go in there and pretend I'm Sherlock Holmes and try and figure out what has gone wrong in this patient's brain, what's changed that accounts for the strange symptoms. And this, of course, is a lot of fun to do because you're learning a lot about the brain, learning a lot about what causes the symptoms in that particular patient. But more importantly, it's telling you about how the normal human brain works and how the activity of neurons in the normal brain gives rise to conscious experience and gives rise to the whole spectrum of abilities that we call human nature.
Can the misfortune of brain injury shed light on the workings of the normal brain? Perhaps even help solve some of the eternal riddles of human nature? Understanding the human brain is one of the ultimate challenges in science.
The human brain is without any doubt the most complexly organized form of matter in the universe. The brain is made up of 100 billion nerve cells or neurons. Someone has calculated that the number of possible permutations and combinations of brain activity exceeds the number of elementary particles in the universe. And this gives you some idea of the staggering complexity one is faced with in trying to understand the functions of this mysterious organ.
But what would happen if the emotions were to run out of control? What effect might an excess of emotion have on the way we interpret the world? John Sharon has temporal lobe epilepsy.
The seizures involve my person and my soul and my spirit, all of it. When I get one of those feelings, though, my whole body just tingles and just, oh, I'm like, that's that.
John's epileptic seizures are essentially an electrical storm in his temporal lobes, when a group of neurons starts firing at random, out of sync with the rest of his brain. Recently, John experienced one of his worst episodes to date. He'd gone out to the desert with a girlfriend, and they'd both got very drunk, with disastrous results. John was suddenly hit by a volley of seizures. Each one lasted about 5 minutes and involved violent convulsions that left him unconscious. Eventually, John managed to get a call through to his father, who drove out to the desert to bring him home.
On the way home, him and I just got into some philosophical, questions about everything, and I just would not shut up. Once I got on the way home, I was going and going. It was like I was wired.
It's basically an earthquake within the body. And like any earthquake, there are aftershocks. And like any earthquake that does damage, things have to be rebuilt. Things have to subside. Mainly what I deal with is the aftermath, particularly with this last episode. It was very much like stepping into a Salvador Dali painting. Okay, instantly everything was surreal. And that's, in essence, what his seizures are all about, the aftermath. Where it puts his brain, where it puts his memory, where it puts his mind, his thinking ability, everything else.
When John's seizures came to an end, he was exhausted, but he felt omnipotent.
I went running down the street screaming that I was God. And then this guy came out, and I was just like pelvic thrust at him and his wife, and I was like, "You want to effing bet I ain't God?"
And I said, literally, "You get back in here. What do you think you're doing? You know, you're disturbing the neighbors, you're going to call the cops. What is this all about?"
I kind of just looked at him cool and calm and apologized to him, and I'm like, "Nah, no one's going to call the police." Like, I didn't say this last part, but I'm thinking to myself, no one's going to call the police on God.
John had never been religious, yet the onset of his seizures triggered overwhelming spiritual feelings.
It has been known for a long time that some patients with seizures originating in the temporal lobes have intense religious auras, intense experience of God visiting them. Sometimes it's a personal God, sometimes it's a more diffuse feeling of being one with the cosmos. Everything seems suffused with meaning. The patient will say, "Finally, I see what it's all really about, doctor. I really understand God. I understand my place in the universe, in the cosmic scheme. Why does this happen? And why does it happen so often in patients with temporal lobe seizures?"
Ramachandran met John shortly after the episode in the desert. He was still feeling the extreme highs and lows that follow his seizures. Ramachandran was about to witness the emotional intensity that John endures.
I've been in so much pain that I'd rather be shot to death, dude, or just whipped to death.
But
Whipped to
also
death.
joy?
Yeah, I've been in so much joy that I would rather be left alone, man. Take everything away and just let me sit there and have that much joy. I feel like I can float and stuff sometimes, you know?
Okay.
It's like the best.
There were times where he would have 7 or 8 grand mal seizures in a day. He would never come back to this reality during that time. I have looked in his eyes in those times, and I have seen a cry for help.
No, I mean, you guys, that's the thing, though. A lot of other people can just walk around and see the beauty of the world. I can... Sorry. It's not as beautiful.
He has a seizure, he'll want to talk philosophy. He'll want to discuss all the things that are floating around in this stew he's got up here that he's trying to reconstruct. Thoughts that he may have had just floating through his mind while he was in a seizure mode may come surfacing.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
but also, you said he's become more emotional because of the seizure, so that's helpful too.
much more sensitive, but oddly enough, not in regards to himself. Okay. But in regards to atrocities, disasters, things like that, anywhere and everywhere. Wrongs done to other people.
Oh, my God. And you know what? I am so right in my own head. I know I could go out there and get people to follow me. Not like these wackos with sheets on their heads. Not like those idiots.
Right.
But now it's just the new generation of the prophets.
Yep.
And were all the prophets people that were flopping around on the ground? Is that what this whole message was? The gift from the gods this whole time?
That's possible, isn't it? Yeah.
I've never been religious, ever. People say, no, you can't see into the future. That's what that gift is, but you gotta pay for it by getting slammed around.
Now, why do these patients have intense religious experiences when they have these seizures? And why do they become preoccupied with theological and religious matters even in between seizures? One possibility is that the seizure activity in the temporal lobe somehow creates all kinds of odd, strange emotions in the person's mind, in the person's brain, and this welling up of bizarre emotions may be interpreted by the patient as visits from another world, or as God is visiting me. Maybe that's the only way he can make sense of this welter of strange emotions going on in his brain. Another possibility is that this has something to do with the way in which the temporal lobes are wired up to deal with the world emotionally. As we walk around and interact with the world, you need some way of determining what's important, what's emotionally salient, and what's relevant to you versus something trivial and unimportant. How does this come about? We think what's critical is the connections between the sensory areas in the temporal lobes and the amygdala, which is the gateway to the emotional centers in the brain. The strength of these connections is what determines how emotionally salient something is. And therefore, you could speak of a sort of emotional salience landscape with hills and valleys corresponding to what's important and what's not important. And each of us has a slightly different emotional salience landscape. Now consider what happens in temporal lobe epilepsy. When you have repeated seizures, what might be going on is an indiscriminate strengthening of all these pathways. It's a bit like water flowing down rivulets along the cliff surface. When it rains repeatedly, there's an increasing tendency for the water to make furrows along one pathway, and this progressive deepening of the furrows artificially raises the emotional significance of some categories of inputs. So instead of just finding lions and tigers and mothers emotionally salient, he finds everything deeply salient. For example, a grain of sand, a piece of driftwood, seaweed. All of this becomes imbued with deep significance. Now, this tendency to ascribe cosmic significance to everything around you might be akin to what we call a mystical experience or a religious experience.
For Ramachandran, John's story is the basis of one of his most intriguing and controversial theories. Could there be a specialized area of the brain that drives human beings to seek religion?
A few years ago, the popular press inaccurately quoted me as having claimed that there is a God center or a G-spot in the temporal lobes. And now this is complete nonsense. There is no specific area in the temporal lobe concerned with God, but it's possible there are parts of the temporal lobes whose activity is somehow conducive to religious belief. Now, this seems unlikely, but it might be true. Now, why might we have neural machinery in the temporal lobes for belief in religion? Well, belief in religion is widespread. Every tribe, every society has some form of religious worship. And maybe the reason it evolved, if it did evolve, is that it is conducive to the stability of society. And this may be easiest if you believe in some sort of supreme being. And that may be one reason why religious sentiments evolved in the brain.
The only reason I probably would get rid of the seizures and epilepsy, because I've never even seen them, is because of my family, because of him. I would keep them for those visions because of the way I see the world falling into place and things like that. It's a wild little place to be stuck in there. It also seems like a key. And right now I haven't learned how to get to the key use the key without those seizures. If I was told that I'd never have a chance to have that key again, sorry, I'm going to hold on to that thing.
Just because some patients with temporal lobe seizures have intense religious experiences, this does not in any way invalidate that experience for that patient. In fact, it can very often enrich the patient's life enormously, and it poses a dilemma very often for the physician, because what right do we have to treat the patient with medication or with surgery, thereby in some instances depriving him of these valuable experiences. To me, the exciting thing is that subjects like God and religion can now be actually addressed by us scientists. We can begin to ask questions about religion and God and begin to approach these questions by listening to these patients, by talking with them, and by studying them.
It's a tragic irony that today's breakthroughs in our understanding of the human brain are made possible by the misfortune of brain injury. For centuries, philosophers have labored to understand God, consciousness, and the mysteries of human nature. Now, perhaps science will have its chance.
Muhammad and Temporal Lobe Epilepsy, TLE, by Ali Sina, The Physical Effects of Muhammad's Ecstatic Experiences. Here is how Muhammad described his mystical experiences. The revelation is always brought to me by an angel. Sometimes it is delivered to me as the beating sound of the bell, and this is the hardest experience for me, but sometimes the angel appears to me in the shape of a human, and speaks to me. Those who saw the Prophet in this state relate that his condition would change. Sometimes he would stay motionless as if some terribly heavy load was pressed on him, and, even in the coldest day, drops of sweat would fall from his forehead. At other times, he would move his lips. Ibn Sa'd says, at the moment of inspiration, anxiety pressed upon the Prophet, and his countenance was troubled. He fell to the ground like one intoxicated or overcome by sleep, and in the coldest day his forehead would be bedewed with large drops of perspiration. Inspiration descended unexpectedly, and without any previous warning. Then Allah's apostle returned with that experience, and the muscles between his neck and shoulders were trembling, till he came upon Khadijah, his wife, and said, "Cover me." They covered him, and when the state of fear was over, all these are symptoms of temporal lobe epilepsy. The following is a partial list of the temporal lobe seizure symptoms and signs, as defined in health.alrefer.com. Hallucinations or illusions, such as hearing voices when no one has spoken, seeing patterns, lights, beings or objects that aren't there. Rhythmic muscle contraction. Muscle cramps are involuntary and often painful contractions of the muscles which produce a hard bulging muscle. Abdominal pain or discomfort. Sudden, intense emotions such as fear. Muscle twitching, fasciculation, is the result of spontaneous local muscle contractions that are involuntary and typically only affect individual muscle groups. This twitching does not cause pain. Abnormal mouth behaviors. Abnormal head movements. Sweating. Flushed face. Rapid heart rate. Pulse. Changes in vision, speech, thought, awareness, personality. Loss of memory, amnesia regarding events around the seizure, partial complex seizure. All the above symptoms were present in Muhammad during the moments that he was allegedly receiving revelations. He had visions, hallucinations, of seeing an angel or a light and of hearing voices. He experienced bodily spasms and excruciating abdominal pain and discomfort. He was overwhelmed by sudden emotions of anxiety and fear. He had twitching in his neck muscles. He had uncontrollable lip movement. He sweated even during cold days. His face flushed. His countenance was troubled. He had rapid heart palpitation. He had loss of memory. There is a tradition that states Muhammad was bewitched and used to think that he had sexual relations with his wives when he actually had not. It is also interesting to note that Muhammad's hallucination was not limited to seeing the angel Gabriel, but he also claimed seeing jinns, and even in one occasion while praying in the mosque, he started struggling with an imaginary person, and later said, "Satan came in front of me and tried to interrupt my prayer, but Allah gave me an upper hand on him, and I choked him. No doubt, I thought of tying him to one of the pillars of the mosque, till you get up in the morning and see him." It is not difficult to see that Muhammad suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy. In fact, TLE was just one of his ailments. The Prophet suffered from other mental disorders and physical complications. The real miracle is in the fact that 1 billion people follow a sick man for so long.
Muhammad is a son of a woman, her name is Amina. But who is Amina? We do not really know much. Because even the Muslim, they say that Muhammad, when he was born, his family to try to get rid of him. And that is very weird. They send him to a Bedouin women, and they say the reason, none of the female of the family wanted to breastfeed him for Muhammad. And this is a shame, because this is a tribe and they are family. You know, the tribe, this is a tribe. This is a, you know, when we talk about tribe, those people, they die to defend each other. So how in the world not even one female should want to feed the baby who was just born? Why did they want to do that, you know? So they send him out because simply he was rejected by the family, for nobody accept the birth of this child to be the son of their you know, brother. And this is why we see Muhammad is cast away, trying to get rid of him. And then when they cast him to a Bedouin woman, Muhammad, he used to have a seizure, and he faint always. And the woman, she afraid that he will die between her hand, and they will hold her responsible for his death. So she cast him back, and she sent him back, said, I cannot have him, you take your son. So the life story of Muhammad, nothing of it makes sense. What makes sense, that because Muhammad, he was suffer a lot from females, the females of his uncles, as they claim. He hated women very much, and he wanted to seek revenge from them when he got power. This is why we see Muhammad always speaking about women as they are the devil. They are the devil. So he want to abuse them the same as they abused him when he was a child. So we see Muhammad, he says, like, even when he have sex with the women, he says that women, she approach in the image of the devil, and she lead in the image of the devil.